We're going to call the meeting of the City of Bloomington Council work session. Apologize for the delay. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll?
Alderman Lauer.
Here. Here.
Alderman Sage.
Here.
Alderman Malumway.
Here.
Alderman Burgess.
Here.
Alderman Painter.
Here.
Alderman Schmidt. Here. Alderman Black. Here. Alderman Hallman.
Here.
Alderman Fruin.
Here.
Mayor Renner.
Here. Thank you very much. Did you hand me a blank public comment, or was there a public comment?
It's just a Wig, Matt Wig. His name is not on it?
There's no Matt name on it, but Matt, you want to come talk to us? Okay, we'll figure it out later. I have a blank.
Good evening, members of the City Council, and thank you for this opportunity to speak to you. My name is Matt Wing. I live at 2918 Fox Creek Road in Bloomington with my wife Nicole and our one-year-old son Patrick. Last September we had an incident, or an accident rather, where a vehicle left the roadway, drove into our front yard, struck the light pole in the corner of our yard, and hit it with enough speed and force to take down the light pole and send the vehicle all the way across the roadway and through potential oncoming traffic before it came to rest in the front yard of one of my neighbors across the street. Luckily, no one was hurt, but it could have been much worse. So although I had often wondered why the speed limit on this stretch of road was set at 40 miles an hour, this is the event that motivated me to inquire about it and find out why it is what it is, and what I could do to see it set lower. So shortly after this date, I submitted a formal request to lower the speed limit on Fox Creek Road between Oakland Avenue and Stonehedges Court to 30 miles an hour. I've worked closely with my alderman, Dave Sage, who's been very helpful throughout the process. Most recently, the city hosted a neighborhood meeting to discuss the speed limit on March 7th at the den at Fox Creek Golf Course Clubhouse. We had great attendance from the residents of Fox Creek neighborhood, as well as several city officials present, including David Hales, Jim Karch, Melissa Hahn, and Alderman Sage. A big thank you goes to them for making themselves available to hear this important discussion. There were easily over 100 people in attendance, enough so at least where we needed to go dig out more chairs to accommodate seating. Throughout the discussion, it became clear that there was unanimous support of the city taking measures to reduce the speed of vehicles traveling along this stretch, namely lowering the speed limit to 30 miles an hour. This stretch of road is only 7/10 of a mile long, yet it currently features 6 cautionary speed limit signs of 30 miles an hour. For this reason, several others that I don't have the time to get to today, I would like to encourage you, the members of the City Council, to support City Manager David Hale's recommendation of a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit on this stretch of road. I'd like to thank the city officials that have been engaged on this topic. I'd like to thank this group for their time in hearing my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay. At this point, we move to a presentation, and we're going to have an abbreviated discussion because we have a township public hearing at 6:15 and then 6:30 council meeting. Mr. Karch.
Thank you, Mayor and City Council. Tonight, we are going to be talking about Fox Creek Road, a speed limit change in this area. We are going to be looking from Oakland Avenue to Stonehedges Court. We are going to be considering tonight talking about 3 different options. But first, let's get into some of this with the road. The road in that area was built in 1997. In that area, just as Mr. Wing had talked about, is 7/10 of a mile. The area in particular, it was built for the long term to be able to serve that large southwest side of the community. But that is in the long term. Currently, it is a minor collector road. You can see to the east over by the interstate, that's more of an arterial road. But right now, that section of road has somewhere between 1,500 to 3,000 cars a day. But over Fox Creek Road, over further by Veterans Parkway, serves about 10,000 cars a day. And so the cross section of the road right now, if we look up on the screen, you can see there's 1 lane in each direction with the bidirectional turn lane. The key I'd like to highlight for you, though, is the parking lane. You can see there is on-street parking available, and that's going to be a key factor later as we continue to talk. Some of the areas that were pointed out by residents in this section You can see this yellow golf course advisory sign in conflict with the white speed limit sign, and that's one of the factors that has caused confusion for some of the residents, and just that the proximity of where they're at in relation to the speed limit sign. The advisory signs were placed years ago in response to concerns back in the early 2000s. We actually had the ability as a staff to put up advisory signs, but they're not regulatory. That's a key point. Their advisory. Anytime you see those yellow signs, those are advisory in nature. Sometimes they can be either for a hidden drive or a curve, but they're not regulatory. And so that's one of the keys that causes confusion with folks. Public involvement. Actually, the one thing that disappoints me is I wasn't able to get a picture of this great message board. We used something different this time with this discussion, and we think we're going to try to capitalize that on the future. We used a message board on Fox Creek Road on either end of this section of pavement, so people traveling through there. We also did direct mailers, but the message board I think really captured a broader audience, and so it really kind of allowed for more robust dialogue. We thought that was a very good thing. So it was a good public engagement process for this discussion. So let's talk about the three different options. Option 1, leave it at 40 miles an hour. Option 2, lower to 35. Option 3 is lower to 30 miles an hour. Option 1 is not staff recommended nor city manager recommended, but it is important to talk about for a minute. From this standpoint, there's not a high violation rate. The road was designed at 40 miles an hour with the curve in mind. So it was designed with a curve to have people travel slower. We talk about complete streets as a council. This was designed to slow traffic down. Sometimes arterial roads are straight shots. You can see as far as the eye goes. Well, that encourages wide lanes, straight with no distractions on the side, cause people to want to go faster. So in this area, actually, the design was correct. They designed it for 40, and the speed studies show that it meets exactly what it was supposed to. It's hard to actually travel over 40. Most people, the prevailing speed is right at around 40. So that's why whenever there have been speed studies done in the past, it shows to keep it at 40 miles an hour. In the future, another reason that is consideration for 40 is the future land use. In the southwest part of Bloomington, while it seems as if, right now the discussion is, there's not a lot of growth that we see, not expansive growth that we saw back in the 90s and 2000s. But 50 years from now, what will the community be? And so this type of road will be that major connector for a lot of the communities further to the southwest. So all of that being said, as we continue to look forward, staff, though, is from a professional standpoint,
If I could just interrupt
Oh, yeah,
you.
absolutely.
With that option 1, we were saying that's one of the options.
Yes.
There's no reason to say that, let's say half of that time, 25 years from now, we might not be able to up it back to 40.
True. There can always be pressure to push that back up to 40.
It really is if the improvements have been made and there's new development a generation from now, that doesn't preclude us, right?
And there is the argument in the future if violation rates let's say it's lowered to whatever that is, staff would project, there actually are projections as to what kind of violation rate you would have. And so violation rates could be very high and it could justify in the future, but those are options.
Thank you.
So option 2, lowering the speed limit to 35. This is from a professional staff recommendation. We do have civil engineers on staff, professional engineers, and what they do is we're required, whenever we make a recommendation, to base it upon standards of some sort. And this is the hard rub. This is the hard difficulty from a staff perspective. We understand there can be more factors than this, but from our perspective, we have to go from the numbers of what is there. It does take into account things like crashes we can talk about in a minute, but there is Illinois Department of Transportation policy out there that we go by, which is also used by the FHWA and most municipalities. So if we talk about from a professional standpoint, what we have done in the past, we actually have done speed studies along this road. It was built in 1997, right away. It didn't take long for the folks who live along there to say, wow, this is fast. We don't like the 40 miles an hour. I know that the road was built before we had a house, but now that we're here, it's just too fast and we don't like that. So we've done studies in 2001, 2007, 2012, and actually, again, the violation rates are very low. So there's not excessive speeding speeding beyond the regular. Do people speed at times? They do all over town, but this is not one of those that is excessive in nature, what I will say. So what we do then is we also then look at some key metrics whenever we look at what is the prevailing speed, but then also we can take into account how many driveways, how many crashes, what type of, is there parking available. All of those allowed staff to dig into it and say that we were actually able to make the recommendation of lowering this to 35 miles an hour. Some of the key metrics were this. It actually wasn't crashes. It's important for you to know it wasn't crashes that actually made this kind of kick down to a 35. There were 3 crashes in the last 3 years. None of those were from excessive speed. The crashes in the last 3 years were from distracted driving or weather. And so there really isn't a lot of the crashes that we saw that would justify it. But what did justify it is the number of driveways. That there is parking on the street. All of those were factors that we were able to weigh into account to make the recommendation of 35 miles an hour. So let's talk about 30 miles an hour. From a 30 mile an hour standpoint, this is city manager recommended. We have talked about, as the council has talked about complete streets. We've heard from recent conversations on Hershey Road that speed is a factor in crash severity. That is important to know. There are studies out there that show the faster the cars are traveling, if there are mistakes that are made, it's harder to correct. It is harder to control. And so there is the argument and balance as a community of where does the council want to land on speeds. Taking into account that speeds can vary for arterials, collectors, and residentials. We talk about that from a key perspective. So the thing I'll leave you with is that tonight is just for discussion. This is not for action. We can bring this back at a later point, but from a staff perspective, we wanted to engage the council to hear from you as a council of what kind of direction you'd be looking for staff to go.
Okay. Questions, comments of Mr. Karch?
And I mostly intend to listen to what my fellow aldermen have to say, but just a couple of quick questions. Jim, this is now the second or third time I've heard you say excessive speed was not a contributor to the accident. How do you know that?
Going off police report. So this isn't something that I personally determined. It was something that we pulled the police reports and we utilized the information from those to make that assessment.
Right, but that is not to say, I mean, there's no analysis done out there to say how fast somebody was going before they crashed, even if they were being distracted.
That I don't know the level to which the police officer did that, but that's fair. Yeah.
So,
yeah, Chief.
I know the one accident I'm familiar with. I think the driver said, "I was distracted," right? But so my question is then, if we have somebody who goes across multiple lanes, hits a light pole, and then travels back across multiple lanes and ends up in the front yard on the other side of the road, that suggests to me that at least speed could come into play. We got to move on, but but the other thing I want to know is Jim, when and those advisory signs went up long before I was sitting here. If 35 miles an hour is the staff recommended speed, why did staff put up signs that said 30 miles an hour?
It doesn't mean that there's justification for it to be 30 miles an hour. That's a key indicator. This is important for the council to know. Throughout the community, whenever you have advisory signs, they're just that. You can see them driving by a park sometimes. You can see them driving by other areas. So that doesn't indicate that it's regulatory. Police officers are not able to ticket off of those advisory signs. But there can be side things, parks or other likes, golf course crossings, Constitution Trail crossings, which can justify advisory signs.
And I understand they're not enforceable. What I'm trying to understand is in 0.7 of a mile, we have 6 of those advisory signs. If 35 miles an hour is the appropriate speed from a staff perspective, why didn't we use advisory signs that said 35 miles an hour?
This is another key for we can set this at 35, 30, whatever the council directs within that, the altered speed limit or regulatory speed limit. But it's important to know a speed limit sign, and Chief Hefner could answer this as well. It's tough to actually, without enforcement, it's hard to get that compliance. And so that's where you have those things of violation rates. And that is indicative of how accurate does the speed limit reflect what folks are driving. And so that's really the gauge how you judge the speed at which people are driving.
I still didn't hear an answer, though, as to why the signs wouldn't have said 35 versus what they say is 30.
The answer to that is advisory signs are able to be set based upon what the side, it's not something that is, it's something that we actually set based off of MUTCD, other standards. So the reason why they're there is you have the ability as staff to be able to say, now, again, I wasn't here as well, so it's hard for me to defend the actions, but I'm just referencing the fact that when you have an advisory sign, you have to go off of even standards then by what it is. So if it's a park or whatever that is, you can look at the advisory sign and set it based off of the MUTCD or other standards that are out there.
So there were some standards suggesting that the advisory sign should be 30 miles an hour.
I'd have to look into it, but I would assume so. I can't imagine it was just
Thank you, Jim.
said.
Since we had questions, Chief Hefner, did you want to add to that? We had questions about police reports and the extent to which the driver was distracted.
I was just going to say, without looking at the report, all I can tell you is that the officers do take all the information that they can gather at the scene to determine the causations. And if they thought it were speed, they would have denoted that, either through witness statements from the driver, physical evidence from the scene. That's what they would do. But that's all I can comment on.
Okay, thank you. Alderman Lauer.
Well, I think we need to be careful here. I'm not sure that we did the right thing with the Hershey Avenue. I don't think we reached out to the community quite enough. It is important, however, to realize that this is a collector street and it's not a through street for a large volume of traffic. And so I would wonder approximately how much traffic we are seeing here as compared to some of those other areas. And I have to assume that this is almost all neighborhood traffic.
Good question. So earlier on we referenced the fact that right now the ADT, the average daily traffic, is between 1,500 and 3,000. The Fox Creek Road over by Veterans Parkway is 10,000 by comparison. Hershey Road in the area where we were considering was 18,000 by comparison. So 10 times, that's a very rough number, but even 10 times the amount of traffic along one. So on Hershey Road, it is definitely an arterial road, but there's a lot of through traffic, people going from the definition of an arterial. Collector by nature is, again, just that. This is a minor collector. And so this isn't even one of the major roads. And so as Mayor pointed out earlier, maybe in the future, as it continues to develop, it would become that. And the future councils can always consider that if growth continues to happen.
It's also my observation, and maybe I'm incorrect, but the advisory signs were primarily put there historically due to golf carts crossing the street, and that's a seasonal issue. So that's another addendum here. And do we have a school zone in the area along this route?
Not in this route. There are two schools in the area, Danbury and Fox Creek Elementary.
But do we have a school bus area? Is there pickup and drop-off along here?
Sure.
I think that's another consideration here as well. Thanks.
Okay. Alderman Milwamboy.
Sure. Jim, what I'd like to know is depending on what choice we make, so if we make, let's say, 30 miles an hour or 35, then what process are you going to go through to evaluate, how that's working once we make that decision? And how long are you going to take to do that?
Sure. It is easy to make the change. The change in the speed limit signs is just to take one sign down, put up another sign. That is very easy to make, depending upon what the decision is from the council. If it was 35, we would keep up the advisory signs. If it was 30, we'd take down the advisory signs. There's no need for an advisory sign reflecting exactly what the regulatory sign says. And so but whenever we make a change in the speed limit, we put up flags. We probably would put up message boards so that there's an indication so people have some awareness. We leave that up for a length of time. Evaluation would come in the form of a speed study that probably would be done, I would recommend, after the completion of the bridge. After the completion of the Fox Creek Road Bridge that is set to begin the construction season of 2018. And why? Why would that make a difference? Because speeds are affected even along a long route whenever you have construction. And so we might be able to do a preliminary speed study, but I would hesitate to be definitive with construction, major construction in the area, because that affects who's traveling and what routes they're going.
Alderman Burgess.
Thank you. And I think you've done this well, but I'll do it again, which is to highlight the differences, and my understanding of the differences between the different recommendations, because it is unusual, I think, for us to have three recommendations, two coming from the staff level, one from the city manager, one from the staff itself. And that is, I think the city manager's recommendation is taking into account criteria that traditionally the Public Works Department has not. For example, when you stand next to a road where traffic is traveling 40 miles per hour, you have a very different qualitative experience from those who are standing on a road where the traffic goes 30 miles per hour. It's just a very different feeling. You feel less safe. It is less desirable for people who want to live there. All of those factors which you can't easily calculate and put into a calculation. In that same regard, when it comes to a vehicle going 40 miles per hour, it has substantially more likelihood of causing great harm when that driver is distracted. I mean, you showed the nice chart with the different fatality rates, and those are different factors that we now as a city council really want to be taken into account. So I'm hopeful we can find a way to start merging these recommendations so we get a single recommendation. Um, but um, uh, but I think this one is a difficult one because for you, from an engineering standpoint, are starting almost where there are assumptions that have been made that you had nothing to do with, which is that this road should be built to go 40 miles per hour. And lo and behold, we shouldn't be surprised that traffic goes 40 miles per hour. It was a well-designed road, but that doesn't answer the bigger question of should the road accommodate 40 miles per hour, or should we be looking at 30 miles per hour? And is there a justification to deviate from that state standard, which is 30 miles per hour? Is 30 miles per hour the appropriate minimum or maximum? I'm not sure it's a minute. The appropriate experience that everyone in a residential neighborhood should have. But I appreciate the fact that we have multiple recommendations here because we can, as a council, can really begin to explore these different factors and what weight we want to give to all of them. So thank you.
Thank you. Alderwoman Schmidt and then Fruin.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I support this going to 30 miles per hour. And I think there's an awful lot of parallels here with our conversation as a council about Hershey Road and and the way that matches what we're doing with Complete Streets. It's about more than managing cars. It's about managing pedestrians and schools and bicyclists, and particularly I think it was pointed out that there'll be a lot more access to Constitution Trail once that work is done. So it's a very different lens that we look through for this, and I appreciate all the work that went into talking with the neighbors about this. I appreciated all the work that went in that Alderman Painter put into talking with people about Hershey Road. I think that option 3, from my perspective, is the one that takes us, again, a little bit further to embracing and understanding what complete streets are.
Okay. Alderman Fruin.
I think I, too, would be inclined to go with the 30, I think for different reasons than maybe Karen has spit out, so maybe we can match these up. But what I recall about Hershey is consistency was important, so we wanted 30 up and down Hershey. Hershey had very few driveways, very few streets, especially between College and GE. Hershey also had a lot of pass-through, what I'll call, going to north of College. So if we made the decision to go to 30 there, what I see on this one, what I see is different here is you've got more driveways. You don't have the pass-through that you have on Hershey. Two different scenarios there. And I keep thinking about consistency, and I'm thinking about why not take this all the way to Veterans Parkway. That's what we wanted on Hershey. We wanted it as long as we could at 30. Think about what you've got between Veterans and Interstate. I wrote down a couple of them. You got daycare, you got senior living, soon to be open, you got a garden center, you got a gas convenience store, you got a union hall, you got the UPS. And if daycare and senior citizens and everything else doesn't enter the mix here, it really argues the fact that this 45, 40, 35, it's changing. Mm-hmm. So if consistency was important to us on Hershey, it ought to be consistent to us here. And all I would suggest going forward, since I'm going to be hold the applause gone May 1, but I hope the council doesn't spend their time talking about Hershey's and Fox Creek. Very important topic tonight, respectfully. But there's a dozen of these out there. So if you want to spend your third Monday of the month talking about Hershey's and Fox Creeks and everything else, I can bring you a dozen as a new public citizen. So let's get a handle on this. Consistency, one number. I know it's not all look alike, but I think it's important we develop some program. Anyway, I'm more inclined to go with a 30 based on our Hershey Road decision.
Okay. I heard a couple of 30s, but now at the end of the day, if we brought something to the council for action, and if it was at 30 and the council decided 35, that'd be a very simple amendment to make. Yes, Alderwoman Howland.
And you may not have it, you may not have this answer. Is there a breakdown of speed limits? I mean, in terms of how many miles we have, there are 30, 35, 40 in the city?
I'm not aware of one. I think our geographic information system, I'd have to check to see if it's in one of our themes, or we could pull a report like that.
I mean, I'd just be curious because I live on the south end of Hershey, and I'm always wondering, especially when one of our friendly police officers is sitting there in Rolling Brook Park, I look down to see, because I still don't even remember what the speed limit is on my part of Hershey Road. Well, unfortunately, I think you're right, because when I look down sometimes I'm going, more than 30, but I've been lucky so far. And so, I mean, if we're talking consistency, I'm just wondering, if there's how many roads we have that are 35 versus 30, and just looking at that. Thanks.
Okay. Anybody else? Alderman Scott Black.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. I don't really have a strong opinion about this. I would defer to Alderman Sage. I mean, it's his ward. I don't know what the neighbors are speaking on this issue, although it sounds like a lot of public outreach has been done, so I think that always speaks very highly of staff and the level that we try to go to get feedback publicly. I just want to put my 2 cents in that this is another example of where I think that we need to have an expanded stack over there, because it's I don't want to be up here trying to eyeball and spitball, okay, should it be 30, why not 25? I mean, this makes me uncomfortable because I'm not an expert, and I like the recommendations, and I see some method behind both. But Jim's right. I mean, for every one of these, there's a dozen more of people that are going to want to come forward and explain it, and you can make compelling cases on both ends. But I just think it's incumbent upon us to craft a process that engages the public when these discussions come forward, because we'll be spending every third Monday talking about each one of these types of streets, and I think that's not the best practice for us. So in terms of my feedback, I'd be happy with either of them. I get, and I'm referring to option 2 or 3. I think 40 is some compelling evidence why that's too fast. But regardless of how we got to now, that's my feedback.
Okay. Any other questions of Mr. Karch? And as I was sharing with Alderman Sage just before we began, in private conversation, I was out there the other day. It was kind of dusk, and it was a little scary. I didn't see anybody walking across the bridge, but it was definitely scary. I don't remember how fast it was going. I wouldn't quote it if I did, but probably too fast. But anyway, thank you so much. It sounds like we might very well bring an ordinance back to change it to 30. If there's a majority is 35, that's a very simple amendment for us to make. So I think we have reasonable direction for staff as we go forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, at this point, is there a motion to adjourn? Moved by Alderwoman Schmidt. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderman Howman. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. We're adjourned, and we begin in 2 more minutes. So.